for this month's sew along we made the Sew-liberated Hinterland dress. I made the one with just the button placket, the top part of the button placket, not the full button placket, and the long sleeves. So yeah, made up in a needle cord. So yeah, I hope you enjoy the sew along. So that's the front. It has pockets, of course, both sides, and it just ties up at the back. Okay, happy sewing. Okay, so this is the Hinterland dress that we're making this month. Okay, and I'm going to make it in this needle cord fabric. So the first thing it wants us to do is to stay stitch the neckline, and also the armholes if you're doing the arm side, if you're doing the sleeveless version, but I'm going to do the 3/4 sleeve version. So it wants you to get your front bodice. I've got one with the sleeve, and then my back bodice with the sleeve. Okay, so I'm going to take these pieces off. I'm just going to, I've marked all my notches around the edge, in the edge of the here. So all these, I've marked my notches in here with just a small snip, just within the seam allowance, and then I've marked the point of my dart on the front bodice here with a tailor's tack. So I'm doing the size 12 here, so I'm just put a point, mark the point there with a tailor's tack. Then I'm just going to open those up and slip it in between, so I've got one equal on each side. Okay, so then it just wants me to go and stay stitch. So I'm going to reduce my stitch length to 2. It explains all how to do all this in your instructions. Reduce the stitch length to 2, and I'm going to stitch at 1/2 inch seam allowance, or 1.3 centimeters around there. So start from the shoulder and work down to there, and then from the shoulder and work down to there. And then on the back you're going to start from the shoulder, work to the centre, shoulder, work to the centre. It's just less risk of it stretching out, which is why we're stay stitching, to prevent that happening. Okay, so I'm going to do that, and then I'll come back and we'll stitch the darts. Okay, so that's the neckline stay stitch. You can see that around there. Okay, that's the back, and the same, exactly the same thing on the neckline with the 2 fronts. So I'll put the back to one side for 1 minute while we do the darts. So next we want to do the darts. So what we're going to do is, where you've marked your 2 dart legs with notches on the side there, you're going to fold those together, lining those edges. She says can't put them together now. There we go. Let's get that at the edge there, and then just line up the point there where you've marked with your tailor's tack in there. So make sure that's nice and flat. Put a pin in the middle somewhere. And you're just going to mark your dart line. So you want to mark from where the notch was there to the point of your tailor's tack there. I'm going to do it with a heat erasable pen, but you could use a chalk pen, anything like that. Something with quite a fine point. You wouldn't necessarily want a chalk, might be too wide a point to it, but you can get chalk pencils, all sorts. Then we're going to mark that along there. Okay, so then we're going to stitch from here. We're going to back stitch, turn your stitch length to a normal length now. Then we're going to back stitch here and stitch to the end and stitch off the end there, and then tie off the threads, and then press the dart. Okay, so that's the dart sewn there, and then pressed down towards the waistline. Okay, and then it wants you to neaten the edges, so of the 2 shoulder seams and the side seam. So you don't have to worry about the middle or this bit yet, but the 2 shoulder seams and the side seams on the front. So I've overlocked mine, but you could zigzag on your machine, or bind the seams however you want to finish them. So I've also done, it also tells you to do the shoulders of the back and the 2 side seams there as well. Okay, so that's those. Put those to one side for a minute, and then it wants us to do the waist ties. So the waist tie piece, and then we're going to fold these right sides together. So right sides together. Pin those in place. Now it tells you to just stitch down one long side, turn it out, and then put the ends, then turn the ends in. I prefer to go across and round, and then I'll clip my corner and turn it all out in one. I just find it easier than trying to turn that little end in. So I'm going to stitch along, I'm going to go along and then down one side and leave the other end open. But the instructions do say leave both ends open, turn it right out. Do it that way, and also I find it easier to turn it out with one end secured. So I'm going to just pin that like that and go over. So I'll go and stitch those, and then I'll show you how to turn it out the right way, what I do clipping the corners and turning it out the right way, and then we're going to edge stitch around the outside of it to make sure it sits nice and flat and neat. So I'm going to go and do these, okay, and then I'll come back and show you how I turn it out and clip those corners at the end, grade the seams down. Okay, so this is my waist tie sewn, okay. So I did stitch around and down the side there, as I say. So it tells you to trim it down to 3mm, but I just prefer to grade the seams, so I'm just going to trim one down. Trim one down to about 3mm. So once I get going, I can show you. And then trim that one down, just the one seam. Difficult to do sometimes, trying to let you see what I'm doing as well. Right, there we go. Oops. A bit more creased. And then again on the top, just check if that's delivery of my printer, and then clip that corner like so, and then clip that corner like so. Okay, and then we'll turn it out. So I'm gonna just get the end that I've sewn across at the end. Just tuck that in slightly, and then you can use a knitting needle. This is just part of the point turner, but you can use a knitting needle. I tend to put the blunt end in the end that I'm pushing the fabric onto, just so that I don't damage the fabric, and then I'll use the pointed end in a minute. Sorry about that, I'm expecting a delivery of my AO printer, so it's just right. So that's using the blunt end, and I just usually go back in with the pointed end and just point those corners out, just into that corner there and that corner there. Okay, and I'll give that a press. Okay, so we're going to give that a press. And then I've done this one, so then once you've given it a press, you're going to stitch around close to the edge, sort of down across the bottom and up the other side, so leaving the end that the unstitched end open. But I've got, because we're putting it into the seam now, which the other seams are neatened, I've just neatened that edge on the overlocker preferred method. In hindsight, I probably could have, you could wait and put these on and then neaten that edge. I hadn't thought of that. So then you're going to want to baste your waist tie in place along here. Now it has to be 3/4 of an inch up from the bottom so that we're allowing for your waist seam to go in. So we're going to pin that there like that. Okay, I'm going to do exactly the same with the other side. So this is going on the back piece. All right, I'm going to do exactly the same with the other side, and then we're going to baste those in place at about, yeah, 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then we're going to attach the fronts to the backs. Okay, we'll come back then. Okay, so that's the ties basted in place at the side seams there. Okay, so now we're going to stitch the shoulders and the side seams. So that one there, there, and then up at the side seams, so just like that. That's that one, and then the side seam. To line up properly, it's better. Okay, so I'm going to stitch those shoulder seams and side seams, do exactly the same with that side. It's 1 inch, so that's 5/8 of an inch across there and down there, and the same on that side. And I'll press those seams open, and then we are going to do the neck facing, so that's like the neck binding. Okay, so that's next. Okay, so that's the bodice sewn with the waist ties caught in, and I've just pressed the seam allowances open on my sides and on my shoulder seams. Okay, so then you want your, now we're going to do the neck binding, or neck facing as they call it, but really it's like a binding. So that's this piece here. I decided to use a piece of wide bias binding that's exactly the right width of the fabric there, just because I thought it would help support the neckline. It's quite a sturdy fabric, the needle cord, but I just thought a cotton would be better. So put that to one side. So you want to just fold it with the wrong sides together, so wrong sides of your strip together like that. Okay, and then we're going to pin that to the right side of the neckline. So I'm going to start at the centre back. So I found the middle of my tape, middle of my facing piece, and then I'm just going to pin around there. So all the way around that neck edge. Get rid of that. I'm just going to snip that one off where I pressed my seams open. I've just got one of the seams sticking out, so I'll get rid of that. Pin both of those to make sure that my seam allowances stay open. Sometimes when you're sewing, the foot plate can move it. So let's just do that. And then it wants you to attach this round, so it doesn't say any different, so it must be the 5/8 of an inch standard seam allowance. It does say it will stick out slightly from the edge at the end there. Okay, so I pinned all that around there. Exactly the same on the other side. So just being careful not to stretch it as you pin it. Just Just let it sit against it nicely. I'm just going to get rid of that seam. It's there. Window open today, so you might hear a bit of tapping. I think someone's working over the back. It's that time of year. Autumn's definitely setting in now, and people are trying to get things done outside in the garden and all sorts, aren't they? It's just that time of year. At least it's not raining today, so that's good. Take our little dog Molly out for a walk in a minute. I've done a bit more of this. Okay, so that's all pinned around. Okay, so that's to the right side of your fabric, and then that is going to fold over underneath to the wrong side shortly. So we're going to stitch around that. It doesn't say anything different, so it must be 1.5. And then you want to trim the seam allowance down to 1/4 inch. Yeah, and then we're going to understitch the seam allowance to the facing when we trimmed it down, and then fold it over. So yeah, I'm just going to stitch that round at 5/8 of an inch, and then we'll trim it down, and I'll show you how we'll understitch it. Okay. Okay, so that's that sewn around the neckline. Oops. That's that stitched around the neckline there. So now we're going to trim this seam down to 1/4 inch. I don't catch anything else. I shouldn't. It's difficult to do this in view, so I'll show you when I've done better, but I obviously don't want to cut a hole in the So then you want to press that seam allowance over towards the facing, and then we're going to understitch close to that edge there. So I'll show you that on the machine. I'll just get that pressed up, and then I'll show you how we'll understitch around there. Okay. Okay. So you just want to get your needle just along this edge here of your bias tape. So you've got the seam allowance towards the binding, well, they call it facing, but it's binding really. So towards the binding bit there, and then make sure that's all pushed well across, and then you're just going to stitch round to the edge. So just take it steady, take it slow. It's sort of quite, because you've made quite a, you need to make quite a small seam allowance. If you're worried about doing a 1/4 inch seam allowance, you could always make it a little bit wider, but then you might need to just clip into your seams to allow it to sort of come around the curves a bit more. But because it's a 1/4 inch seam, you want to get quite close to that edge if you can, to catch that, and the seam, to catch this seam on the other side. That's why you've got to go quite close to the edge of the binding tape there. round. Just leave it running now, but I'll probably just cut some of this short. A general idea. Right, some people sort of think, oh, is it necessary? But it does create a nice edge, so it's going to stop the sort of this binding showing on the main side of the fabric when you fold it over. The next step is when to do it, when we sort of stitch that down, but I prefer not to put a label in the back of my back of the neckline. I find if anything it just irritates. It's quite nice not to have when you make your own, really. I often cut them out ready to wear because they often get in the way. So a couple of little back stitches. So that's the can you stitch, see that? Okay, yeah, so that's it stitched along there close to that edge, and then when we fold that over to there, you see you naturally get that folded over. Oh, get it in short. Naturally get that folded over to the right side, so you don't see any of the binding from that side, and that side you will just see a slight edge of your outside fabric. Okay, so we're going to fold that over, pin that down, and then we can stitch down there. Okay, so that's it under stitch. So now we're going to turn it over to lay along the bodice, the inside of the bodice, and just pin it in place. So when you're doing that, it's worth just putting it on a surface and making sure that that just sits flat. And you're not getting any, and make sure that you're not getting any puckers on the other side when you're going to stitch it. So no puckers in your fabric or anything. You just want to make sure you've got that little bit of your outside fabric showing over to the wrong side. So it look nice and neat on the right side. There we go. Okay, so then we're going to go back over to the machine, and now we just want to stitch along that edge of that binding tape all the way round. Okay, so that's the neck binding sewn in place. Okay, so we just need to put that to one side for the moment. So then it says to go on and do the sleeves. So I'm doing the 3/4 sleeves. So it asks you to do 2 rows of just using a long stitch, 2 rows of gathering stitches around the top of the sleeve, just from the single notch to the double notch around that sleeve head. So I've done that, and then it just wants you to neaten your edges. So I've overlocked my edges there, and then we're going to sew this sleeve seam here. So we're going to join those edges together there. Line them up at the bottom there. So I'm going to stitch these sleeve seams and then press them open, and then we're going to attach. So then it says to set in the sleeve, and then once you've set in the sleeve, then do the cuff. But I'm going to do the cuff before I set the sleeve in, just because it's much easier to do. So I'm going to do the same thing with that one, those side seams, those sleeve seams rather, not side seams. So that's that piece out of the way. Now what have I done? There it is. So then we want the sleeve cuffs. So we're just going to turn those a long ways like that, and then stitch down this short edge down here. We don't need to neaten these edges because they'll all be folded inside, so that's fine. And the same with that one, so right sides together. And then we're going to stitch down this short edge. Yeah, so it doesn't say anything different, so it'll be 5/8 of an inch down here. And then we'll press that open. Okay, and then as I say, I'm going to fit them to the sleeve before I put the sleeves into the dress. Okay. So with those edges neatened, I then stitch those sleeve seams 1.5 centimetres for 5/8 of an inch, and press those open. Okay, so that's those two. And then the sleeve cuff, we just sewed along those short edges and press that open. Okay, and then it wants you to fold it. Then it wants you to fold it in half, wrong sides together, like so, lining up those raw edges, and give it a press, which I've done with that one. Okay, and now we're going to attach it to the sleeve. So we want the sleeve in the right side out, and then we're going to put this on the inside. So we're going to join that to the inside, around there, like so. Oops. She says if she can get it in there. I think I might do it the other way round. I think it'd be easier to show you, so I'm going to turn that the other way. It'd be easier to show you, but you're attaching it to the, tells you to do it the other way round, but basically you're attaching it to the wrong side of your sleeve. So just get one pin in there, and you can fold that around. Goes around the outside of your sleeve hem, like so. That wiggle to get that even. So once you've got one pinned one side, so you want your sleeve, the seam allowance of your sleeve cuff to line up with the undersleeve seam, and then it's best to line up the other side once you've got that straight, and then do two corners, two other sides, that one. Okay, so that's like that. Okay, so you've got your raw edges, you're attaching that with folded edge here, raw edges there, all matching together around the cuff there, and then we're going to sew that with, see, okay, so it doesn't say any different, so it must be a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance, and then we're going to trim and grade the seam allowance, and then we're going to understitch a bit like we did round at the neckline. Okay, so I'm going to do those to both sleeves. I'll stitch around there, and then I'll show you how we grade it, and I've shown the understitching, so then I'll show you how we're going to turn that up over to the right side. Okay. Okay, so we've stitched the cuff to the sleeve around that seam there. Okay, so that's all stitched inside there. So then it wants you to trim and grade your seam allowance. So I trimmed down the outer one, the lowest, So you're just trimming them, just trimming your seam allowance just to different lengths so that it's not all quite so bulky in one place. Get hold of it. Show you what that looks like. It's fiddly to do when you're doing it on the camera. Any other time it's easy. I think it's because you're trying to do it at a different angle to when you're cutting your way. Okay, so that's one trimmed down, okay, like so. And then I'm just going to trim the other two of the cuff together as they're not overly thick. If they were really bulky, then you'd want to make those two a different sort of depth as well within your seam allowance, but it's not overly bulky, this needle cord, so it's fine. I'm just trimming that down just slightly higher than the other one I trimmed. Alright, so it's just graded like that, so it's a different length. So then, usually this time, it wants us to do it slightly different, so it wants us to press the seam allowance wants to be pressed up towards the sleeve, okay, and then we're going to understitch around this edge on the sleeve edge, okay, so that when that folds up it keeps the inside over. Okay, so like I've done here, I've understitched around there, okay, so that's the sleeve, seam facing up towards the sleeve, and then you understitch around there, and then you're going to turn that up, and that folded edge we're going to stitch around that to attach that all in place around there. Okay, so I'm going to do that with both of those, and then we'll inset the sleeves. Okay. Okay, so that's the cuffs of the sleeve sewn around there. Okay. Oh, it's dipping down the rain now. Just as I was thinking I was going to take our little Molly for a walk. Right. So, next we want the bodice part inside out, and then your sleeves in the right way. Okay, and then you'll have the notches on your sleeve. You'll have a single notch in the sleeve head, which will usually be at the front, and then a double notch, which will usually be at the back. And that is how it is on this pattern. So some French or independent patterns are slightly different, but this one is the standard is the same. So you're going to put your sleeve, which you've got the right way out, inside your bodice, which is the wrong way out, so inside there, and then you're going to find your side seam of your bodice and the under sleeve seam and match those two together. Come here, elephant. Make sure your seams are open so they sit nice and flat. Oh, it's tipping it down in rain now. And then you'll have a notch at the top, single notch at the top, which joins your shoulder seam. I usually pin it either side of there just to make sure I keep that seam allowance of the shoulder seam flat and open. And then coming round to the front side here, you'll have a single notch on your sleeve that joins up with a single notch on there. Just pinning that side really. Let's change those round. Changing those round. Usually pin from the inside and sew from the inside. Okay, and then your double notch of your sleeve joins up with a double notch of your back bodice piece. Okay, and then you just got to make sure that's sat nice and flat. There shouldn't be too much easing on the undersleeve, but you might have some easing to get in on the sleeve head, hence you've done those gathering stitches, which aren't to be, it's not for gathering really, it's just for easing that fullness in the sleeve heading. So I always do the bottom two first, So the bottom between the underseam and the notches, just because they usually just sit nice and flat. Make sure you get those in nicely. Okay. And then we'll look at this. So we've got this here to ease into that there. Okay, so all we do is pull up our 2 threads, which just to give some of that, take some of that ease, fullness out. You're not really gathering it as such, you just want a slight bit there, so it's not puckered or anything, it's just gently easing to help ease that in. Okay, and then we're going to pin that in place. Okay, so that's that side, and then go over to the other side, and then you're going to want to get your threads again, just pull both threads together just to get some of that ease into that sleeve head. That looks like that's enough, and just make sure none of that is really puckered up, and just pin around one in there. Usually do the centre first and then go to 1/2 and just see that that's going to ease in properly. Try and keep those seam edges together, or edges together rather. Your other half, just find the centre in that, and the centre, pin that. Centre there we go. So that's all pinned in place. I'm going to stitch around there 1.5 or 1.6 actually centimetres, isn't it, or 5/8 of an inch. So once you've stitched around, just make sure that you haven't got any sort of puckers in your sleeve before you go ahead and overlock and everything. If you've got any little puckers, you can just undo a few stitches either side and it will usually pull out, and then just re-stitch that in. So we're going to sew around there. I'm going to overlock, or you can zigzag on your machine, however you're neatening that. And then we'll press the seam allowance and the seam allowance towards the sleeve. So I'll go and stitch and serge those, do the same with the other one, press them towards the sleeve, and then it does say then to go on to do the skirt, and then later on do the placket, but because I'm only doing the half placket, I'm going to do that next to finish the bodice piece ready to attach to the skirt, because that does go on first, whereas if you're doing the full length placket, then obviously you've got to attach the skirt first and then do the placket, but because mine's only the half bit, I'm going to do that next. Okay. Okay, so that's the sleeves all attached now. Okay, so they're sewn in and then overlocked, and then I've just pressed the seam allowance towards the sleeve. Okay, so that's those done. So next, as I say, it does say to go on and do the skirt and then do the placket later, but I'm going to do the placket now. Then the bodice bit is finished. Obviously, if you're doing the full length placket, you have got to attach the skirt first. So you've got your placket piece, your placket. I've got the bodice only placket, okay, because I'm just doing the placket to the top. That's those pieces there, okay, and then you've got a little strip here that you want to cut a couple of pieces of your interfacing to attach to your bodice placket. and you've got whichever placket you're going to do, you'll have the right interfacing piece for. So what it wants you to do is to attach it so that you've got two edges, you know, so that you've got one symmetrical to the other. Okay, so just so you can see that. Yeah. So what it wants you to do is to attach the edge 5/8 in from there and 5/8 in from there. So where's my 5/8? There we are. So 5/8 in from the edge that side, and then 5/8 in from the edge that side, and that'll be the same down there as well. Okay, and you want, you know, them one symmetrical to the other. Okay, so then we're going to attach those to the bodice front. Let's get those out of the way before they fly all over the place. Right, so next we want the bodice front. Where's it gone? There it is. Okay, so then we want the right sides together, and we want to line it up at the bottom edge. So you want to make sure you've got the bit with your interfacing to this side, not this section. So not like that, okay, because you want this bit that side. Okay, and it will overlap at the top, that's absolutely fine. You just want it lined up along the bottom. So that's one side, and then we'll just attach the other side. So line it up at the bottom. Okay, so then we're going to stitch, it's down there 1.5. Yeah, so sew down that seam there, then we're going to trim the seam allowance. Away. Right, so having stitched that down there, okay, it then wants you to fold it over, press the seam allowance towards that side. Okay, I am going to just grade that seam a little bit. I did on the other one, didn't I? Yeah. I'm going to trim them both down. It just says trim it to 1/4 inch, all of it, I think, but I'm just going to grade mine a little bit. It's just, I prefer to, so it's less visible and bulky. So I've cut down 1/2, and I'm just going to trim that one back just a little fraction more. Just so all the edges, the point of grading it is just so that all the edges aren't together in one place, so that they don't sort of make a sort of any bulky seam underneath on the inside. There we go. Okay, so I've just graded that like that. All right, and then it wants you to press the seam allowance towards the placket, and then fold over. Now it says a scant 5/8 of an inch, so just under 5/8 of an inch to allow you to overlap this seam. So then it wants you to fold it back, right sides together, and line those there. Pin through there. You have got a notch at the top there as well, which helps you line it, know where to fold it. And I tend to just put one down here just to hold it in place level with that seam, so it's not pulling out. Okay, so then what it's going to want us to do now is level with your neck piece, neckline, neck fold there, neck binding, it wants you to stitch across there. Okay, so stitch across that side there. So I've done that on this one. On this side I've stitched across there, and then I've trimmed the corner and just graded that top seam a little bit, because then we're going to fold that out to the right side. I'll just get a point turner on that corner just to get that corner out nicely, and then we're going to want to fold this edge just slightly over that stitching line. And then you're going to want to stitch round it from the top side. So what I tend to do is I'm going to just tack down this edge here, okay, to make sure that's all in line with that seam line, and then from the right side we're going to stitch up, across and down, and we're going to do that with both of the plackets. Okay, so I'll do all that, and then I think we're going to mark where the buttonholes are going to go. Yeah, and then I think it's onto the skirt piece. Okay, so I'll do that next. That's my placket stitched around all the edges, okay, and that's just showing you where I tack it in place. So I just tack it there, catch the edge of the placket there, and then into the ditch of the seam there, so that just holds that in place. I'll take those out in a minute. So then you want to put your buttonholes onto the right side of your top piece of your bodice. Now it says in the instructions it's the left side, but that's as you look at it. So this is the left side as I'm looking at it, but if you're wearing it, it's the right side. Okay, so the first one needs to be 2¼ inches up from the bottom. Okay, so 2¼ inches up, and then the other one I want about there. So then if I measure in between those two, that's 6.6 inches. So if I want to put another 2 buttons in between there, so I divide it into 3. So I'm going to go with 2.2 there, and then 4.4 there. And that should leave my gap 2.2, 2.2, 2.2. Yeah, so that should be fine. Let me just put those in properly. And I just want to make sure they're all the same distance from. So I tend to mark with a pin. You can mark with some chalk or a heat erasable pen, whichever you prefer. But I tend to mark with a pin. Okay, so that's the bodice part completed. Okay, I've sewn my buttons on, and then so I just hand tacked that in place along the bottom there, so I had some thread left from sewing my buttons on. So I've done that bit there. So now we're going to move on to making the skirt. So you should have two pieces of this cut on the fold, so one for your front and one for your back. Okay, and then you should have 4 pocket pieces cut out. Okay, now it wants you to overlock or neaten your edges, whatever you're going to do, down just the side seams of both of the skirt pieces. So both side seams of the front, both side seams of the back. Make sure you keep your notches. So to keep my notches in, I just usually mark some fabric on the wrong side of the fabric, mark it with a heat erasable pen or some chalk before you overlock, and also again the same with the pocket notches there. Okay, so then it wants you to do all around. For the pocket piece, it wants you to overlock all the way around those edges, okay, of all 4 of your pocket pieces. And then it does suggest you give them a press, which is a good idea, because sometimes your overlocker can just wrinkle up the edges a bit. So let's get rid of those pieces out of the way. Right, so then we're going to want our, let's get one of our fronts or backs, and then with right sides together we're going to line up these pocket edges here. So notches on the back there. So you want your notch of your pocket edge to join that top notch there, and then the other notch of your pocket edge to join that one there. Okay, I'm going to stitch them, pin those in place. And then it wants us to sew it in place at a scant 5/8 of an inch, so just slightly inside of your normal seam allowance. And then the other one on the other side here, and you're going to do exactly the same. So say this is the front, you're going to do exactly the same with the other piece for the back. One up there. Line those up at the top, they're very straight. And then the same again there. And then we're going to sew, so it does tell you to sew all the way down this side. So you haven't got to, no, you haven't got to notch it or anything, so that's fine. So I'm going to do both of those. Okay, so sew down just from here to here to attach that pocket, just a fraction under your 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I'm going to do that for the front, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing with the back piece. Okay, and then we'll, I think it then wants us to understitch the seam allowance, yeah, which I'll show you. This is when we'll flip those over and understitch those, so I'll show you that in a moment. So that's the pockets sewn on down there. Okay, then you want to press your pocket over to the side like that. Okay, so with your seam allowance facing out this way, and then you want to understitch, so down that, so down the edge of here, okay, like I have done on the other ones here. Okay, you see that? Okay, so just understitch along there, and that just helps keep your pocket folded over. So then when you've done that, I'll go and understitch that one in a moment. So when you've done that, I've understitched all these. So next we're going to line up our side seams there at the top. And line our pockets there. That one there. And going again now. I'm going to put one here. So that's roughly where I'm going to stitch to. About there. And just join the pocket edges together. Okay, And then you're going to sew from the top here. Pin out. So you're going to sew at the top there, so 5/8 inch seam allowance down there, then stop about here, pivot, and then sew round there, stop there with your needle down, pivot, and then sew down to the bottom there. Okay, it's also worth here where you sort of start sewing down again, just a back stitch a couple of little bits there, and possibly here just before you pivot to sew the pocket. Just if you do a little back stitch there, it'll just help reinforce where your pockets, because that's the bits, you know, when you keep using your pockets, that's the bits that'll be under strain. So it's a good idea to do that there. And then I'm going to do exactly the same with the other side. And then we're going to put the gathering stitches, or we're going to clip the seam to press the pocket over to the fronts, and then we're going to gather the top seam to attach it to the skirt. Okay, sorry, attach the skirt to the bodice even. Okay, so that's the pockets sewn. All right, sewn. So I've sewn down to there, pivoted, just stitched around the pocket, pivoted, and then just stitched down to the bottom. And then you want to press your pocket towards the front, whichever is your front piece, and then you just want to clip into your seam allowance for the back to allow it to lie flat, so like that. Okay, and then you can press these seams open. All right, so you want to do that on both your seams. Just make sure you've got them both going the right way. Okay, both going towards the front. So then it wants you to put some gathering stitches around the top. So I've got the half placket at the top, so I've got no button band down the centre here, so I've just gathered right along the front and then separately right along the back. And it tells you to do your gathering stitches at 1 centimetre and then at 1.6 5/8, so 3/8 and then 5/8. But the 5/8 is going to sit on the seam allowance, so I've just done mine more towards the 2 centimetre line, just so that I can take those tacking stitches out easily without them getting caught in the stitch line. So that's what I prefer to do. And then I've quartered, so you've got your side seams here, okay, and then I've just quartered them up so that if you do that, and then you can get the half of your back and your front. So I've just put 2 pins in for the halfway mark at the front and 1 pin in at the halfway mark at the back. And then you're going to get your some threads on there. Just get your bodice piece. I might tie those ties together for a moment so they don't keep flapping about. Going to want the front to line up with my front piece here, because that's the way my pockets are going, okay, towards the front there. So we're just going to put all this inside your skirt, sleeve and all, and then find the centre of that button placket and line that up with the centre front there. So I'm going to pin that on. I can take that extra pin out. And then I'm gonna, never marked the centre of my back, so I'm just gonna do that. Put a pin in it, but I just got the scissors here. I'm just gonna tiny little snip into that centre back, and then I'll position that with the centre back of the skirt. And then you can line up your side seam with the side seam of your bodice there. And that side seam, the side seam of your bodice there, or tacked over my seam. Open as well, because they tend to flip over when you sew that's as we've got it at the moment. All right, so now we need to gather this into place. So I'm just going to catch those stitches. I don't want it gathered right into that side seam, just outside the seam allowance, and then I'm going to pull up those gathering stitches. Just gently moving along. Once you've got roughly the amount you need to fit that gap, then I just wind it around the pin there, and then you can move those along to fit. I'm going to pull up the other side first, I think. Sorry, my phone's like the local hotline today. Right, okay, so now we want to do this side. Let's just get those stitches out where I want them. So I tend not to gather it right into the side seam because I don't want it too gathered around there. I tend to just do it just in the side of there, because your seams, you've got your seam there, which is obviously more layers and thicker, so I don't really want to gather at that point. Wrap those round in a figure of 8 like so, just to hold those in place. Okay, so that's the front. Generally right, but obviously they're really uneven at the moment, so I'm just going to try and even those out. So you just literally, now you've got that, if you don't sort of secure it one end, as you even them out, then you can sort of suddenly then you have to start pulling it in again. So it's a good idea just to attach those ends somewhere and then just even them out like so. And then pin those in place. Same on the other side. Put a few just into that centre bit of it. Okay, so that's that half done. Okay, so you're going to do exactly the same process with the back piece, and then you're going to stitch 1.5 centimetre, 5/8 of an inch all the way around there, and then we're going to overlock these edges, and then it's just doing the hem, I believe. So yeah, so I'll do that and I'll show you what I've done. Okay, so then so I've stitched around there and overlocked the edges and pressed the seam up. Now it does say, it has considered, you know where it asks you to do the gathering stitches, and it says in here to do it at 3/8 of an inch and then 5/8 of an inch, and that's because it's going to tell you to stitch the seam round at 1/2 an inch rather than 5/8. So yeah, I've just got a slightly deeper stitched hem, but that's fine. Stitched waistline seam, not hem. So then for the hem, it just wants you to stitch around a 1/4 inch stitch line around the bottom, and then use that to press up a 1/4 inch, and then press over again an inch. Okay, like so, and I've just pinned it in place. like so. Okay, so then I'm going to just stitch around here to finish that hemline, and I'll show you when I've done that, and then I think we're finished. Okay. Okay, so that's the Hinterland dress completed. Sew my hem and just sewn along the edge there all the way around. Okay, so that's all completed now. So I'll just need to give that a good press. I'll get some photos of me wearing it, and I should have put I'll probably put a video at the beginning showing the dress to you also. All right, so I hope that helps someone with their sewing. If you could like our video, then it just helps other people get to see it and find us on YouTube. And if you want to subscribe, it's completely free to subscribe, but you'll just get notification of when I put out our last video. I usually try to get it out for the first day of the month. Not quite sure what I'll do for next month, but yeah. Okay, thank you, happy sewing, bye.